insight into the experiences of the states in 2016, as well as hear about efforts to maintain election security moving forward. For our second panel, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, the Honorable Connie Lawson, President-elect of the National Association of Secretaries of State, and the Secretary of State of Indiana. Michael Haas, the Midwest Regional Representative to the National Association of State Election Directors and the Administrator of the Wisconsin Election Commission. Steve Sandvoss, Executive Director of the Illinois State Board of Elections. And Dr. J. Alex Halderman, Professor of Computer Science and Engineering, University of Michigan. Thank you all for being here. Collectively, you bring a wealth of knowledge and a depth of understanding of our state election systems, potential vulnerabilities of our voting process and procedures, and the mitigation measures we need to take at the state level to protect the foundation of American democracy. In January of this year, then Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, designated the election infrastructure used in federal elections as a component of U.S. critical infrastructure. DHS stated that the designation established election infrastructure as a priority within the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. It enabled the Department to prioritize our cybersecurity assistance to state and local election officials for those who requested it, and made it publicly known that the election infrastructure enjoys all the benefits and protections of critical infrastructure that the U.S. government has to offer. Some of your colleagues objected to this designation, seeing it as federal government interference. Today, I'd like to hear your views on this specifically, but more broadly, how the states and the federal government can best work together. I'm a proud defender of states' rights, but this could easily be a moment of divided we fall. We must set aside our suspicions and see this for what it is, an opportunity to unite against a common threat. Together we can bring considerable resources to bear and keep the election system safe. Again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here, and at this time I'd turn to the Vice Chairman for any comments he might make. Vice Chairman doesn't have any. I will assume, Mr. Haas, that by some process you have been elected to go first, unless there is an agreement. Where are we going to start?
Actually, I think we were going to defer to Secretary Lawson to start, if that's okay with the Chair.
Madam Secretary, you are recognized.
Well, good morning, Chairman Burr and Vice Chairman Warner and distinguished members of the committee. I want to thank you for the chance to appear before you today. It's an honor to represent the nation's Secretaries of State, 40 of whom serve as chief state election officials. I am Connie Lawson, Indiana Secretary of State, and I'm also President-elect of the Bipartisan National Association of Secretaries of State. I'm here to discuss our capacity to secure state and locally run elections from very significant and persistent nation-state cyber threats. With statewide elections in New Jersey and Virginia this year and many more contests to follow in 2018, I want to assure you and all Americans that election officials across the United States are taking cybersecurity very seriously. First and foremost, this hearing offers a chance to separate facts from fiction regarding the 2016 presidential election. As noted many times, we have seen no evidence that vote casting or counting was subject to manipulation in any state or locality, nor do we have any reason to question the results. Just a quick summary of what we know about documented foreign targeting of state and local election systems in the 2016 election cycle as confirmed by the Department of Homeland Security. No major cybersecurity issues were reported on Election Day, November 8th. Last summer, our intelligence agencies found that up to 20 state networks had been probed by entities essentially rattling the doorknobs to check for unlocked doors. Foreign-based hackers were able to gain access to voter registration systems in Arizona and Illinois, prompting the FBI to warn state election offices to increase their election security measures for the November election. In more recent days, we've learned from a top-secret NSA report that the identity of a company providing voter registration support services in several states was compromised. Of course, it's gravely concerning that election officials have only recently learned about the threats outlined in the leaked NSA report, especially given the fact that the former DHS Secretary Jay Johnson repeatedly told my colleagues and I that no specific or credible threats existed in the fall of 16. It is unclear why our intelligence agencies would withhold timely and specific threat information from election officials. I have every confidence that other panelists will address voting equipment risk and conceptual attack scenarios for you today. But I want to emphasize some systemic safeguards that we have against cyber attackers. Our system is complex and decentralized with a great deal of agility and low levels of connectivity. Even within states, much diversity can exist from one locality to the next. This autonomy serves as a check on the capabilities of nefarious actors. I also want to mention the recent designation of election systems as critical infrastructure. Real issues exist with the designation, including a lack of clear parameters around the order, which currently provides DHS and other federal agencies with a large amount of unchecked executive authority over our elections process. At no time between August of 16 and January of 17 did NAS and its members ever have a thorough discussion with DHS on what the designation means. Threat sharing has been touted as a key justification for the designation. Yet, nearly 6 months later, no Secretary of State is currently authorized to receive classified threat information from our intelligence agencies. From information gaps to knowledge gaps that aren't being addressed, this process threatens to erode public confidence in the election process as much as any foreign cyber threat. It's also shredding the rights that states hold to determine their own election procedures, subject to the acts of Congress. If the designation ultimately reduces diversity and autonomy in our voting process, the potential for adverse effects from perceived or real cyber attacks will likely be much greater and not the other way around. Looking ahead, the National Association, the NAS Election Security Task Force was created to ensure that state election officials are working together to combat threats and foster effective partnerships with the federal government and other public-private stakeholders. In guarding against cyber threats, the trend line is positive, but more can be done. Most notably, many states and localities are working to replace or upgrade their voting equipment. If I have one major request for you today, other than rescinding the critical infrastructure designation for elections, it is to help election officials get access to classified information sharing. We need this information to defend state elections from foreign interference and respond to threats. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Lawson. Who would like, Mr. Haas?
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, and committee members. On behalf of the National Association of State Election Directors, thank you for this opportunity to share what states learned from the 2016 elections and some steps that we are taking to further secure our election systems. I serve as Wisconsin's chief election official, and I'm a member of NASA's executive board. We do not have a state elected official who oversees elections in Wisconsin. Many of our state election directors across the country are housed in the Secretary of State's office, but some are not. The 2016 presidential election reinforced several basic lessons, although sometimes in a new context. For instance, all of us understand the importance of constant and effective communication to ensure that all actors have the tools they need. The new twist in 2016, of course, involved communicating about the security of election systems with the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the state staff who provide cybersecurity protection to our voter registration databases. As we've heard this morning, some states have expressed concerns about the timeliness and the details of communications from Homeland Security regarding potential threats, security threats to state election systems. The recent reports about attempted attacks on state voter registration systems, which occurred last fall, caught many states by surprise. We look forward to working with DHS and other federal officials to develop protocols and expectations for communicating similar information going forward. For example, state election officials believe it is important that we be in the loop regarding contacts that DHS has with local election officials regarding security threats, such as the spearphishing attempts that were recently publicized. States should be aware of this information to protect their systems and so that we can provide additional training and guidance to local election officials. I appreciate the concern that was expressed this morning that this is a two-way street, and we at the state level need to also think carefully about how to most effectively communicate with our local election officials if and when there is an incident that we are aware of at the state level. As part of the DHS designation of election systems as critical infrastructure, bodies such as coordinating councils can help to facilitate decisions regarding the proper balance between notifying state and local officials and protecting confidential or sensitive information. NASA believes that those coordinating bodies should consist of a broad representation of stakeholders, and we have expressed our strong interest to DHS in participating on those bodies. I would also note that the Executive Board of NASED supports the request of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission that it serves as the co-sector specific agency as a logical federal agency to partner with DHS to provide subject matter expertise and assistance in communicating with local election officials, as the EAC has that communication structure already in place. The 2016 elections also reinforced the need for constantly enhancing the security of voter registration databases, as we've heard this morning. While hacking into a voter registration system has no effect on tabulating election results, intrusions could result in unauthorized parties gaining access to data regarding voters, candidates, ballot contests, and polling places. I would note that while much of that information is public upon request, there may be some confidential data held in those databases, such as a voter's date of birth, the driver's license number, the last four digits of the Social Security number. Different states have different laws about what pieces of that data is confidential. The 2016 elections demonstrated that state and local election officials can implement steps to improve the security of voter data, and that many of these steps are not complicated. In addition to the cyber hygiene scans and risk assessments, states are implementing greater use of multi-factor authentication for users of our systems, updating firewalls, the use of whitelists to block unauthorized users, and completely blocking access from any foreign IP address. The final lesson of 2016 I would like to address relates to voting equipment. To be clear, as it has been said many times this morning, there is no evidence that voting machines or election results have been altered in U.S. elections. I appreciate the committee's emphasis on that. I think that for the public that cannot be stated enough and strongly enough. Still, we as election administrators must exercise vigilance to assure that such theoretical attacks do not become a reality. And we must also continue to educate the public about safeguards in the system. Those safeguards include the decentralized structure of elections that we've heard about this morning and the diversity of voting equipment. Also, in most cases, voting equipment is not connected to the internet and therefore cannot be attacked through cyberspace. Also, it is important to keep in mind that 3 out of 4 ballots cast in American elections are on paper ballots. Most ballots cast on touchscreen equipment also have a paper trail that voters can immediately verify their votes and that election officials can use for audits and recounts. There are also several redundancies in the testing and certification of voting equipment. It's important to realize that voting equipment is not only used on election day. Its functionality is tested several times during the process. In short, the 2016 elections taught us that the potential for disrupting election processes and technology by foreign or domestic actors is a serious and increasing concern. However, we as state election directors believe that continued cooperation and more effective communication along with continued vigilance and innovation, will ensure the integrity of our voting processes and election results. Again, we look forward to working with our federal partners as we plan for elections going forward. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Haas. Mr. Sandevos.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, and distinguished members of the committee. As Director of the State Board of Elections, I'd just like to briefly describe what our agency does. We are an independent, bipartisan agency created by the 1970 Illinois Constitution, charged with general supervision over the election and registration laws in the state of Illinois. As all of you seem to be aware, almost a year ago today, on June 23rd, the Illinois State Board of Elections was the victim of a malicious cyber attack of unknown origin against the Illinois voter registration system database. Because of the initial low-volume nature of the attack, the State Board of Elections staff did not become aware of it at first. Almost 3 weeks later, on July 12th, State Board of Elections IT staff was made aware of performance issues with the IVRS database server. The processor's usage had spiked to 100% with no explanation. Analysis of the server logs revealed that the heavy load was a result of rapidly repeated database queries on the application status page of our paperless online voter application website. Additionally, the server logs showed the database queries were malicious in nature. It was a form of cyber attack known as SQL, which is Structured Query Language Injection. SQL injections are essentially unauthorized, malicious database queries entered into a data field in a web-based application. We later determined that these SQLs originated from several foreign-based IP addresses. SBE programmers immediately introduced code changes to eliminate this particular vulnerability in our website. The following day, on July 13th, the SBE IT made the decision to take the website and IVRS database offline to investigate the severity of the attack. SBE staff maintained the ability to log and view all site access attempts. Malicious traffic from the IP addresses continued, though it was blocked at the firewall level. Firewall monitoring indicated that the attackers were hitting SBE IP addresses 5 times per second, 24 hours a day. These attacks continued until August 12th, when they abruptly ceased. SBE staff began working to determine the extent of the breach, analyzing the integrity of the IVRS database, and introducing security enhancements to the IVRS web servers and database. A week later, on July 19th, we notified the Illinois General Assembly of the security breach in accordance with the Personal Information Protection Act. In addition, we notified the Attorney General's office. On July 21st, the State Board of Elections IT staff completed security enhancements and began to bring the IVRS system back online. A week after that, on July 28th, both the Illinois registration system and the paperless online voting application became fully functional once again. Since the attack occurred, the State Board of Elections has maintained the following ongoing activities. The DHS scans the State Board of Elections systems for vulnerabilities on a weekly basis. The Illinois Department of Innovation and Technology, which is a statewide entity that coordinates the IT systems of many of the Illinois state agencies, continuously monitors activity on the Illinois Century Network, which is the general network that provides firewall protection for the state computer systems. This Department of Innovation and Technology, also called DOIT, provided cybersecurity awareness training for all state of Illinois employees, ours included. The State Board of Elections IT staff continues to monitor web server and firewall logs on a daily basis. And in addition, virus protection software is downloaded also on a daily basis. As a result of informing the Illinois Attorney General's office of the breach, the State Board of Elections was contacted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and we have fully cooperated with the FBI in their ongoing investigation. The FBI advised that we work with the Department of Homeland Security's United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team to ensure that there is no ongoing malicious activity on any of the SBE systems. They also confirmed that is the Department of Homeland Security, also confirmed that there's no ongoing malicious activity occurring in SBE computer systems. To comply with the Personal Information Protection Act, nearly 76,000 registered voters were contacted as potential victims of the data breach. The SBE provided information to these individuals on steps to take if they felt that they were the victims of identity theft. Additionally, the SBE developed an online tool to inform affected individuals of the specific information that was included in their voter record that may have been compromised. As far as looking for future concerns, one of the concerns facing our state and many others, we believe, is aging voting equipment. The Help America Vote Act established requirements for voting equipment, but while initial funding was made available to replace the old punch card equipment, additional funding has not been further appropriated. If additional funding is not available, we would like to receive authorization to use the state's existing HAVA funds to allow spending on enhanced security across all election-related systems. The IVRS database is a federal mandate through the Help America Vote Act. Cyber attacks targeting end users are also of a particular concern. Security training funded and provided by a federal entity such as the EAC or DHS would also be beneficial in our view. In addition, any guidance or recommendations as to methods for the protection of registration and voting systems from cyber intrusions are always welcome. Thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sandvoss. Dr. Holden.
Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about the security of U.S. elections. I'm a professor of computer science and have spent the last 10 years studying the electronic voting systems that our nation relies on. My conclusion from that work is that our highly computerized election infrastructure is vulnerable to sabotage and even to cyber attacks that could change votes. These realities risk making our election results more difficult for the American people to trust. I know America's voting machines are vulnerable because my colleagues and I have hacked them repeatedly as part of a decade of research studying the technology that operates elections and learning how to make it stronger. We've created attacks that can spread from machine to machine like a computer virus and silently change election outcomes. We've studied touchscreen and optical scan systems, and in every single case, we've found ways for attackers to sabotage machines and to steal votes. These capabilities are certainly within reach for America's enemies. As you know, states choose their own voting technology, and while some states are doing well with security, others are alarmingly vulnerable. This puts the entire nation at risk. In close elections, an attacker can probe the most important swing states or swing counties, find areas with the weakest protection, and strike there. In a close election year, changing a few votes in key localities could be enough to tip national results. The key lesson from 2016 is that these threats are real. We've heard that Russian efforts to target voter registration systems struck 21 states, and we've seen reports detailing efforts to spread an attack from an election technology vendor to local election offices. Attacking vendors and municipalities could have put Russia in a position to sabotage equipment on election day, causing machines or poll books to fail and causing long lines or disruption. They could have engineered this chaos to have a partisan effect by striking places that lean heavily towards one candidate. Some say the fact that voting machines aren't directly connected to the internet makes them secure, but unfortunately this is not true. Voting machines are not as distant from the internet as they may seem. Before every election, they need to be programmed with races and candidates. That programming is created on a desktop computer, then transferred to voting machines. If Russia infiltrated these election management computers, it could have spread a vote-stealing attack to vast numbers of machines. I don't know how far Russia got, or whether they managed to interfere with equipment on election day. But there's no doubt that Russia has the technical ability to commit widespread attacks against our voting system, as do other hostile nations. I agree with James Comey when he warned here 2 weeks ago. We know they're coming after America, and they'll be back. We must start preparing now. Fortunately, there's a broad consensus among cybersecurity experts about measures that would make America's election infrastructure much harder to attack. I've co-signed a letter that I've entered into the record from over 100 leading computer scientists, security experts, and election officials that recommends 3 essential steps. First, we need to upgrade obsolete and vulnerable voting machines, such as paperless touchscreens, and replace them with optical scanners that count paper ballots. This is a technology that 36 states already use. Paper provides a physical record of the vote that simply can't be hacked. President Trump made this point well on Fox News the morning of the election. He said, "There's something really nice about the old paper ballot system. You don't worry about hacking." Second, we need to use the paper to make sure that the computer results are right. This is a common sense quality control, and it should be routine. Using what's known as a risk-limiting audit, officials can check a small random sample of the ballots to quickly and affordably provide high assurance that the election outcome was correct. Only 2 states, Colorado and New Mexico, currently conduct audits that are robust enough to reliably detect cyber attacks. Lastly, we need to harden our systems against sabotage and raise the bar for attacks of all sorts by conducting comprehensive threat assessments and applying cybersecurity best practices to the design of voting equipment and the management of elections. These are affordable fixes. Replacing insecure paperless voting machines nationwide would cost $130 to $400 million. Running risk-limiting audits nationally for federal elections would cost less than $20 million a year. These amounts are vanishingly small compared to the national security improvement they'd buy. State and local election officials have an extremely difficult job, even without having to worry about cyber attacks by hostile governments. But the federal government can make prudent investments to help them secure elections and uphold voters' confidence. We all want election results that we can trust. If Congress works closely with the states, we can upgrade our election infrastructure in time for 2018 and 2020. But if we fail to act, I think it's only a matter of time until a major election is disrupted or stolen in a cyber attack. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your leadership on this critical matter. I look forward to answering any questions.
Dr. Haldeman, thank you. The chair would recognize himself for 5 minutes. Members will be recognized by seniority. Secretary Lawson, how many states is the Secretary of State in charge of the elections process? Do you know?
Yes, sir, it's 40. I'm sorry. Yes, sir, it's 40.
Okay. Would you be specific? What do the Secretary of States what is it they do not like about elections being designated critical infrastructure?
The most important issue, sir, is that there have been no clear parameters set. And even after the 3 calls that we had with Secretary Jay Johnson before the designation was made, we consistently asked for what would be different if the designation was made and how we would communicate. Would it be any difference?
So nothing has negatively happened except that you don't have the guidance to know what to do.
Nothing has negatively happened to this date, but also nothing positive has happened.
Got it. Mr. Sanvos, Illinois is one of the few states that have publicly been identified. I guess that's in part because you took the initiative to do it. You gave a good chronology, 23 June, first signed 12 July. State IT staff took action 12 August. The attack stopped. At what point was the state of Illinois contacted by any federal entity about their system having been attacked, or was it the state of Illinois that contacted the federal government?
We were contacted by the FBI. I don't have the exact date, but it was after we had referred the matter to the Attorney General's office. My guess would be probably a week after.
A week after?
After the AG was notified by us of this breach.
And the AG was notified approximately when?
On July 19th.
July 19th, okay. At what point did the state of Illinois know that it was the Russians?
Actually, to this day, we don't know with certainty that it was the Russians. We've never been told by any official entity, and the only one that we're aware of that was investigating was the FBI, and they have not told us definitively that it was the Russians. Our IT staff was able to identify, I think it was 7 IP addresses from a foreign location. I believe it was the Netherlands. But that doesn't mean that the attack originated in the Netherlands. We have no idea where it originated from.
Did your IT staff have some initial assessments on their own?
No, because I think anything of that nature would have been speculative, and we didn't want to do that. I think we wanted to leave that to the professional investigators.
You gave a update on what you're currently doing to enhance the security. DHS weekly security checks. Has the federal, in your estimation, has federal government responded appropriately to date?
I believe they have, yes. I've heard nothing from our IT division, and they'd be the persons that would know. I've heard nothing from them that the DHS's work in that matter has been less than satisfactory.
Let me ask all of you, except for you, Mr. Sanvos, do you believe the extent of cyber threats to election systems should be made public before the next election cycle? Should we identify those states that were targeted? Mr. Haas?
I think as election directors, we're certainly sensitive to the balance that Homeland Security and others need to make. I think so far, as far as we've gone, we want to know as the victims or potential victims, and then I think as part of the coordinating council and the designation of critical infrastructure, there has to be a conversation amongst the election.
Is there a right of the public in your state to know?
Yes, I believe there is. If there was a hack into our system, I think that we would certainly want to consult, our statutes and so forth. But we believe in transparency. We would want to let the public know.
Dr. Haldeman?
I think the public needs details about these attacks and about the vulnerabilities of the system in order to make informed decisions about how we can make the system better and to provide the resources that election officials need. So, yes.
Okay. Secretary Lawson?
I lay awake at night worrying about public confidence in our election systems. And so I think we need to be very careful and we need to balance the information, because the worst thing that we can do is make people think that their vote doesn't count or it could be canceled out. And so if telling the public that that these attacks are out there and that our systems are vulnerable, and it doesn't undermine confidence, it makes them know that we are doing everything we possibly can to stop those attacks, I'd be in favor of it.
I take for granted none of you at the table have evidence that vote tallies were altered in the 2016 election.
Correct.
Dr. Haldeman, before I recognize the Vice Chairman real quickly, when you and your colleagues hacked election systems, did you get caught?
We hacked election systems as part of academic research where we had machines in our facilities.
I get that. Did you get caught? Did they see your intrusion into their systems?
The one instance when I was invited to hack a real voting system while people were watching was in Washington, D.C. in 2010. And in that instance, it took less than 48 hours for us to change all the votes, and we were not caught.
Vice Chairman.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I find a little stunning, Mr. Sandoval, your answer. I don't know. I think if you saw the preceding panel, you had the DHS and the FBI unambiguously say that it was the Russians who hacked into these 21 systems. And I find it a little strange that they've not relayed that information to you. What we discovered in the earlier testimony is that we finally got public disclosure that 21 states were attacked. And under questioning from myself and Secretary Harris, we found that even though we know those 21 states were attempted to be hacked into or doors rattled or whatever analogy you want to use, that in many cases, the state election officials, whether the state directors or the secretaries of state, may not even have been notified. I find that stunning. And clearly, lots of local election officials, where the activities really take place, haven't been notified. So I've got a series of questions, and I'd ask fairly brief responses. Dr. Haldeman, can you just again restate, as Senator King mentioned in the earlier testimony, you don't need to disrupt a whole system. You could disrupt a single jurisdiction in a state, and if you could, in fact, wipe that ledger clean, you could invalidate potentially not just that local election, but then the results at the state, the congressional level of the state, and ultimately the nation. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So we are not, while it's important, and I believe in our decentralized system, we are only as strong as our weakest link. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Haas and Secretary Lawson, do you believe that all 21 states that were attacked, that the state election officials are aware?
I can't answer that question, sir. I'm not certain. I will tell you that Indiana has not been notified. I don't know if we're even on the list.
I don't know for sure, except that DHS did indicate in a teleconference that all of the states that were attacked have been notified.
Well, we were told earlier that that's not the case. We were told that they may have been the vendors may have been notified. So do you know whether Wisconsin was attacked?
We have not been told that there was an attack in Wisconsin.
Are you comfortable, either one of you, with not having that knowledge?
We are hypersensitive about our security, and I would say that when the FBI sent the notice in September for states to look for certain IP addresses to see if their systems had been penetrated or attempted to be penetrated, we absolutely searched. In fact, we looked at 15,500,000 logins that had happened in our system since the 1st of January that year. And so we believe that our system has not been hacked.
I would also state that both our office and the Chief Information Officer of the state and his office would likely be able to detect that the system was hacked.
We've got the two leading state election officials not knowing whether their states were one of the 21 that at least the Russians probed. Let me finish, please. And, you know, I understand the balance. But the notion that state election officials wouldn't know, that local election officials clearly haven't been notified. I appreciate the chairman's offer. The chairman and I are going to write a letter to all the states. If you view yourself as victims, I think there is a public obligation to disclose. Again, not to relitigate 2016, but to make sure that we're prepared for 2017, where I have state elections in my state this year, and 2018. And it's to do otherwise, because there are some still in the political process that believe this whole Russian incursion into our elections is a witch hunt and fake news. So I could very easily say some local elected official saying, this is not a problem, this is not a bother. I don't need to tighten up my security procedures at all. And that would do a huge, huge disservice to the very trust, Secretary Lawson, that you say you want to try to present and provide for our voters. So I hope when you receive the letter and we'll write this on a confidential basis, but that you would urge your colleagues to come forward, again, not to embarrass any state. But I find it totally unacceptable, one, that the public doesn't know, that local elected officials don't know, local election officials don't know, that you as the leaders of the state election officials don't even know whether your states were part of the 21 that has been testified by the DHS that at least they were, if not looked at, door jiggled, or actually, as the case in Illinois, where actual information from the voter registration efforts were exfiltrated. So my hope is that you will work with us on a cooperative basis, and we want to make sure that DHS and others are better at sharing information, and you get those classified briefings that you deserve.
Senator Risch.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sandoval, July 12th was the date that you first discovered that you had issues, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was a result of a high-volume spike, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Then when you looked at it, you found out that the intrusion attempts actually had started June 23rd, is that correct?
Yes.
So, and those were low-volume spikes starting on June 23rd.
Yes.
All right. So if they had never cranked up the volume, is it fair to say you would have never discovered it, or probably wouldn't have discovered it?
I would say it would probably not have been discovered, certainly not right away. And if the volume was low enough, even an analysis of our server logs might not catch something like that because it wouldn't stand out. So I think the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah. Then you said 7 days later, the 19th, you notified the Attorney General. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
That was the Illinois Attorney General, not the U.S. Attorney General. Is that correct?
Yes, state law requires that we notify the Attorney General in these instances.
So then the next thing that happened is you were contacted by the FBI. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So the question I've got, and I'm just trying to get an understanding of the facts. Are you assuming that the Illinois AG contacted the FBI, or do you know that or not know that? Or
I don't know that for sure, but I would suspect that they probably did, because how else would the FBI know?
Right. Well, and that's kind of where I was getting, is that was not the result of some federal analysis, or that there wasn't a federal analysis of this that turned up what had actually happened. Is that a fair statement?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. You then did some things to try to mitigate what had happened. Have you shared this with other states as to what you had done in order to, I don't know, develop a best practices, if you would?
We didn't have any formal notification to all 50 states, no. I think our focus at that time was trying to repair the damage and assess, what needed to be done, especially with respect to the voters who had their, information accessed. I believe that once the FBI became aware of this, I know they contacted the different states. I don't believe our Attorney General's office did, although I don't know that for certain. But we did not have any formal communication with all 50 states regarding this.
And do you believe that you have developed a best practices action after this attack that you've described for us?
I believe so, yes.
You think it would be appropriate for you to get that out through the Secretary of State's organization or other organizations so that other states could have that?
Certainly, absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Haldeman, your hacking that you've described for us, would your ability, if you were sitting in Russia right now and want to do the same thing that you had done, would that ability be dependent upon the machines or whatever system is used being connected to the internet?
That ability would depend on whether pieces of election IT equipment, IT offices that are where the election programming is prepared are ever connected to the internet. The machines themselves don't have to be directly connected to the internet for a remote attacker to target them.
So would you recommend that the voting system be disconnected from the internet, that is, be a standalone system that can't be accessed from the outside?
It's a best practice, certainly, to isolate vote tabulation equipment as much as possible from the internet, including isolating the systems that are used to program it. But other pieces of election infrastructure that are critical, such as electronic poll books or online registration systems, do sometimes need to be connected to internet, to systems that have internet access.
But that wouldn't necessarily require that it be connected to the internet for the actual voting process. Is that right?
That's right.
And then the extrication of that information off of the voting machine. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair to say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all of this really needs to be drilled down a little bit further, because it seems to me with this experience, there's probably some pretty good information where you could put a firewall in place to stop that, at least minimize it. Thank you.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank all of you. I want to start with you, Professor Halderman. What are the dangers of manipulation of voter registration databases, particularly if it isn't apparent until Election Day when people show up at the polls to vote?
I'm concerned that manipulating voter registration databases could be used to try to sabotage the election process on Election Day. If voters are removed from the registration database and then they show up on Election Day, that's going to cause problems. If voters are added to the voter registration database, that could be used to conduct further attacks.
Let me ask, and this can be directed at any of you, I'm trying to get my arms around this role of contractors and subcontractors and vendors who are involved in elections. Any idea, even a ballpark number of how many of these people there are? 10, 70, 200?
Vendors that host the voter registration system. I'm sorry, Senator, I don't have a number.
Sir, I don't have an exact number either, but I will tell you in Indiana, for an example, we have 6 different voting system types. Counties make that decision on their own, but they are all certified by our voting system technical oversight program.
That was my next question. So somebody is doing certification over these contractors and subcontractors and equipment vendors and the like. Does that include voting machines, by the way?
It does. Most states will have a mechanism to certify the voting machines that they're using, the electronic poll books they're using, the tabulation machines that they're using, making sure that they comply with federal and state law, and making sure that they have the audit processes in place.
So do you all have a high degree of confidence that these certification processes are not leaving this other world of subcontractors and the like vulnerable?
I have several concerns about the certification processes, including that some states do not require certification to federal standards, that the federal standards that we have are unfortunately long overdue for an update and have significant gaps when it comes to security. And that the certification process doesn't necessarily cover all of the actors that are involved in that process, including the day-to-day operations of companies that do pre-election programming.
One last question. We Oregonians and a number of my colleagues are supportive of our effort to take vote by mail national. And we've had it, I was in effect the country's first senator elected by vote by mail in 1996. We've got a paper trail. We've got air-gapped computers. We've got plenty of time to correct voter registration problems if there are any. Aren't those the key elements of trying to get on top of this? Because it seems to me, particularly the paper trail, if you want to send a message to the people who are putting at risk the integrity of our electoral institutions, having a paper trail is just fundamental to being able to have the backup we need. I think you're nodding affirmatively, Professor Halderman, so I'm kind of inclined, or one of you two at the end were nodding affirmatively, and I'll quit while I'm ahead if that was the case. But would either of you like to take that on?
Vote by mail has significant cybersecurity benefits. It's very difficult to hack a vote by mail system from an office in Moscow. There are, whether vote by mail is appropriate for every state in every context is, in our system, of course, a matter for the states, but I think it offers positive security benefits.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt.
Dr. Haldeman, on that last answer to that last question, how do you count vote by mail ballots?
Generally, they would be counted using optical scanners.
Exactly. So you count them the same way you count ballots that aren't vote by mail in almost every jurisdiction.
If the optical scan ballots are subsequently audited, you can get high security from that process, but yes.
Well, that's a different question. Your question there is you prefer paper ballots and an audit trail, and I do too. But let's not assume that the vote by mail ballots are counted any differently. They're counted probably at a more central location. But that doesn't mean that all the manipulation you talked about that we need to protect against wouldn't happen in a vote by mail election. You've got a way to go back, and you've got a paper trail to count against wouldn't happen in a vote by mail election. You've got a way to go back, and you've got a paper trail to count.
That's correct. There are three things you need.
System. If it's a touch screen system, you mentioned Colorado and New Mexico already did a required sample audit, which I'm certainly not opposed to that if that's what states want to do or it's the best thing to do. How would you do a non-paper audit?
Senator, I think it would be difficult or impossible to audit non-paper systems with the technology that we use in the United States to a high level of assurance.
So even if you don't have something to audit, it's pretty hard to audit a system that that didn't leave a trail.
Basically impossible.
So, Mr. Stanvos, in Illinois, do you certify counting systems?
Yes, we do.
And Secretary Lawson, do you certify counting systems?
Yes, sir.
Haas, in your jurisdiction, somebody is certifying those systems that you use?
Yes, we both rely on the EAC certification, and then our commission does a testing protocol and then approves the equipment to be used in the state of Wisconsin.
And back in Illinois, do you then monitor in any way that counting system while it's doing the actual counting?
No, the actual counting done on election day, or election night rather, is done locally at the county clerk's offices or Board of Election Commissioner offices. Right. We certify the voting equipment. They have to apply for certification and approval, which we conduct a fairly rigorous test of the voting equipment. But then in actual practice, other than we do conduct pre-election tests of the voting equipment on a random basis before each election, but it's a limited number of jurisdictions.
And do you do that in a way that allows you from your central office to get into the local system, or do you go to the local jurisdictions or just monitor how they count that, how they check that counting system?
When we do our pre-election test, we actually visit the jurisdiction.
All right. Secretary Lawson, similar?
Similar, however, the state does not go into the counties, but the counties are required to do a public test, and as I mentioned, it's public, and so they're required to do testing on the machines, the tabulation. There's a bipartisan election board that's there
I guess the point I'd want to drive home there is that not opening that door to the counting system, if you don't have a door, nobody else can get through that door as well, but there's monitoring. There's local testing. Don't suggest at all that Dr. Halderman's comments aren't important or something we should guard against. I was an election official for 20 years, including the chief election official for 8 of those, and something, as we were transitioning to these systems, something I was always concerned about is what could possibly be done that could be done and undetected. One of the reasons I always like the audit trail that obviously Dr. Haldeman, you do too, is that you do have something to go back if you have a reason to go back and really determine what happened. on Election Day. Let's talk for just a moment about the much more open registration system. Secretary Lawson, you said you had 15,500 logins. I believe that was, talk about logging in. What are they logging into there? The statewide voter registration system that you maintain a copy of?
The 92 county clerks in Indiana are connected to the statewide voter registration system, and that 15,500,000 logins reflected the work that they did that year.
15,500,000. So obviously that's a system that has lots of people coming in and out of that system all the time. Do local jurisdictions, like if the library does registration, do you have counties where they can also put those registrations directly into the system?
Other than the counties, no, sir, but we do have indianavoters.com where a voter can go on and register themselves. And it's a record that is compared to the B&V record, and then the counties will find that information in their hopper the next day, and then they will, or their computer system, and then the next day they will have the ability to determine whether or not the application is correct.
Do all of your jurisdictions, the 3 jurisdictions here reflected, have some kind of provisional voting if you get to the voting place on Election Day and your address is wrong or your name is wrong or it doesn't appear at all? Do you have a way somebody can cast a ballot before they leave?
Yes, sir.
And in Illinois?
Yes, we do.
We have provisional ballots, but they're very limited. We are not an NVRA state, and we also have Election Day registration, so people can register at the polls.
So the failure to have your name properly on the, I understand, Chairman, and I've also noticed the time on others, but just the registration system is much more open than the tallying system. That doesn't mean the tallying system doesn't need to be further protected, but the registration system, the idea that somebody gets into the registration system, there are plenty of ways to do that. Unfortunately, we think now other countries and governments may be doing that as well.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Haldeman, you're pretty good at hacking voting machines by your testimony. Do you think the Russians are as good as you?
The Russians have the resources of a nation state. I would say their capabilities would significantly exceed mine.
I expected that was going to be your answer, but I wasn't sure whether your modesty would but I think that's an important point, because you've testified here today that you were able to hack into a voting machine in 48 hours, change the results, and nobody knew you had done it. And if you could do it, I think the point is the Russians could do it if they chose. And we've been talking a lot about registration lists. My understanding is that quite often a voter registration list at some point in the process is linked up with, the computer that has the voter registration list is linked up with configuring the voting machines and perhaps even tallying votes. Is that true? Can any of you?
No, sir.
There's no connection between the registration list and the voting machines?
No.
Illinois, is that?
Not in Illinois, no.
Okay, well.
That's correct.
Then I was mistaken. Yes, Dr. Haldeman?
I believe that depends on the specific equipment involved. There may be some designs of voting systems where the sign-in and the vote counting system are linked.
But of course, if, as you testified, I think if the voting registration list is tampered with in some way on Election Day, it would be chaos if names disappeared, people arrived at the polls and their names weren't on the list. Isn't that correct, Ms. Lawson?
If a person showed up at the polls to vote and their name wasn't on the list as they were expecting, they would be given a provisional ballot. I think the biggest danger is that the lines at the polls would increase significantly if there was a large number of folks who had to do that in each precinct.
Right. That was what I was referring to. On August 1 of 2016, press reports have indicated that there was an FBI notification to all of their field offices about the danger of cyber intrusions into voting systems. Supposedly those were passed on to state election systems. Did you three get something from the FBI around August 1st that gave IP addresses and some warnings about what should be done?
Yes, we did receive an FBI flash. It was in August, and
Okay.
you're saying the first. I believe that was the case.
Yeah, I understand that was the date of it. Ms. Lawson, did you receive that?
Yes, Indiana received a notice from the FBI.
We did as well.
So there is some interconnection. I mean, one of the things that I'm sort of hearing, and I'm frankly appreciative and happy that you all did receive that notice, but there seems to be a lack of information sharing that goes on that we really need to be sure that, for example, if something happens in Illinois, some system whereby you can alert your colleagues across the country to look out for this. And if we learn things here in Washington, if the FBI learns things, that they can alert people around the country, because the best time to deal with this is before the election. After the election or on election day is much more difficult. Dr. Halderman?
Yes, I would support further information sharing.
And then finally, we've talked about what we do about this. Paper trails has come up. Is that the principal defense? Is that, Dr. Haldeman, what if, I asked the question of the prior panel, what would you tell my elections clerk in Brunswick, Maine would be the three things most important that they should do, or my Secretary of State in Maine, to protect themselves against a threat we know is coming?
The most important things are to make sure we have votes recorded on paper ballots, which just cannot be changed in a cyber attack, that we look at enough of that paper in a post-election risk-limiting audit to know that the electronic records haven't been changed, and then to make sure we are generally increasing the level of our cybersecurity practice. Information sharing is an example of a good and recommended practice, as are firewalling systems and other things that have been suggested.
One final question. Is it possible, and there's some press reports about this, of a cyber attack on the vendors of these machines to somehow tamper with the machines before they go out to the states? Is that a risk?
I would be concerned about that. And in fact, the small number of vendors is an example of how our system in practice is not quite as decentralized as it may appear, that attacks spreading via vendors or from vendors to their customers could be a way to reach voting equipment over a very large area.
And there have been press reports that in fact was attempted in 2016.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this hearing. This is such important information for the public and for our democracy, and I appreciate your work here today.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Harris.
Thank you. So there's a saying that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is the difference between being hacked and not being hacked is knowing you've been hacked. And so I appreciate, Dr. Halderman, the recommendations that you and your colleagues have made, because it also seems to cover the various elements of what we need to do to protect ourselves as a country in terms of our elections, which is prevention, and then there's the issue of detection, and then also resilience. If we discover that we've been manipulated, let's have the ability to stand back up as quickly as possible. So I have a few questions in that regard. First of all, have each of you received for the states, received the notification from the FBI? Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And were any of you also notified by DHS? Mr. Sandvoss?
We've had communications with DHS. I don't recall how they were initiated, but I do know that there have been the conference calls with them, and it may have been through the FBI that occurred.
And I'm speaking of before the 2016 election.
Yes.
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 Secretary Lawson?
Yes, we did have conversations with Department of Homeland Security. However, it was through our national association. It was not a direct contact with the state.
Thank you.
We were one of the states that took up DHS on their offers to do the cyber hygiene scan. We did have a number of communications with, I believe, a point person in their Chicago office. The FBI alert, I think, was about a specific incident, but our communications with DHS were more about general steps that could be taken to protect our systems.
So as a follow-up to this hearing, if each of you, to the extent that you can recall the nature of those conversations with DHS before the election, if you could share that with the committee, that'd be helpful so we can figure out how notifications might be more helpful to you in the future. If hopefully they're not necessary, but if necessary. Can you, Ms. Lawson, tell me, Secretary Lawson, what in your opinion are the pros and cons of requiring states to report to the federal government if there's been a breach or a hack? What can you imagine would be the pros and cons of a policy that would require that?
Well, the pro would be that if, for an example, the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security has better ways to counter those attacks or to make sure that the reconnaissance is done after such an attack is more sophisticated than the states, then obviously that would be a pro. Indiana did not take the opportunity to have DHS do our cyber cleaning because we felt that we were in better shape than what they could provide for us. So that would be the con.
Okay. And can you, Professor Halderman, tell me, before this last election cycle, there had been a lot of talk through the years in various states. Senator Blunt, I'm sure you were part of those discussions about the efficacy of online voting because it would bring convenience, speed, efficiency, accuracy. And now we can see that there will be great, potentially, vulnerabilities by doing that. So can you talk with me a little about, just in terms of policy, is the day of discussing the need for online voting, has that day passed because of the vulnerabilities that are associated with that?
I think that online voting, unfortunately, would be painting a bullseye on our election system. Today's technology just does not provide the level of security assurance for an online election that you would need in order for voters to have high confidence. And I say that having myself done, hacked an online voting system that was about to be used in real elections, having found vulnerabilities in online voting systems that are used in other countries. The technology just isn't ready for use.
And isn't that the irony that the professor of computer engineering and I, who always believe that we need to do more to adopt technology, that government needs to adopt technology, I think we're advocating good old days of paper voting are the way to go, or at least an emphasis on that, instead of using technology to vote. Can you tell me also, and any of you if you know, it's my understanding that some of the election system vendors have required states to sign agreements that prevent or inhibit independent security testing. Are you familiar with that?
That certainly had been something that inhibited attempts by researchers like me to study election systems in the past.
And do you believe that that's a practice that is continuing?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Have any of you had that experience with any of your vendors?
In Illinois, no, we have not, and I don't think Illinois law would allow such an agreement.
Yeah.
I don't believe that would happen in Indiana either, Senator, because in order to sell voting equipment in the state of Indiana, it has to be certified.
All right, which requires testing.
Yeah, which requires testing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Any senators seek additional questions or time? Seeing none, let me wrap up. I want to thank all of you for your testimony today. Secretary Lawson, to you. I really encourage you as the next representative of Secretaries of States to remain engaged with the federal government, specifically the Department of Homeland Security. And I think with any transition of an administration, there is a handoff and a ramp up. And I've been extremely impressed with our witness from DHS, who not only was here today, but she has taken the bull by the horns on this issue. And I think you'll see those guidelines very quickly, and I hope that there will be some interaction between Secretary of State, since in 40 states you control the voting process. And you can find the system of federal guidance and collaboration that works comfortably with every Secretary of State in your organization. I think it is absolutely critical that we have not only a collaboration but a communication between the federal government and the states as it relates to our voting systems. If not, I fear that there would be an attempt to, in some way, shape, or form, nationalize that. That is not the answer, and I'll continue to point Mr. Santos to Illinois. It is a great example of a state that apparently focused on the IT infrastructure in staff and didn't wait for the federal government to knock on the door and say, hey, you got a problem. You identified your problem. You began to remediate it. At some point, the federal government came in as a partner, and I think where we see our greatest strength is to work with states and to chase people like you, Dr. Haldeman, who like to break into. No, I'm just kidding with you. Listen, I think what you did is important, and I think the questions that you raised about the fact that you really can target to make the impact of what you're trying to do very, very effective. And that's clearly what campaigns do every day. So we shouldn't be surprised if the Russians actually looked at that, or anybody else who wants to intrude into our voting system and our democracy in this country. I've got to admit that the variation of voting methods, 6 in Indiana, where I don't know how many counties you've got. I've got 100 counties in North Carolina. It may be that I find out that every county in North Carolina has the power to determine what voting machines, what voting software they have. This can get extremely complicated. Short of trying to standardize everything, which I don't think is the answer, is how do we create the mechanism for the federal government to collaborate directly with those heads of election systems in the states and understand up front what we bring to the table and how we bring it, so that we're all looking at the same thing, the integrity of every vote going to exactly who it was intended to do. So, yeah, we're going to have debates on paper or electronic. We're going to have debates on what should the federal role be. At the end of the day, if we haven't got cooperation and collaboration and communication, I will assure you we will be here with another Congress, with another makeup of a committee, asking the same questions, because we won't have fixed it. But I think that what Dr. Haldeman has said to us is there's some ways that we can collectively approach this to where our certainty of intrusions in the future can go down, and the accuracy of the vote totals can be certified. So I thank all 4 of you for being here today in our second panel. This hearing is now adjourned.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us and choosing us as your stream of choice. President Donald Trump is actually having 2, not 1, but 2 speeches today, back to back. We're going to start our coverage at 4 p.m. That's when he's having his first speech. And then after that, he is having a Make America Great Again rally in Iowa. So 2 speeches by President Donald Trump. Later on today, we start our coverage at 4 p.m., so make sure that you guys join us. I put the link in the chat a couple times. I'm going to do it again, but it's also in the description below the video, so make sure that you guys join us. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope that you guys go over there, give it a thumbs up, share it, all that good stuff, and I hope to see you guys back on the chat later on today. Again, I'm going to be putting up the link in the chat, but it's also in the description below. Go over there, give it a thumbs up, like I said, share it, and put it on social media. Make sure to let people know that we're going to stream it here live at Golden State Times. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you guys soon. Peace.